Unions call for work from home rights while employers want greater flexibility in hours worked. Qantas set to overhaul its frequent flyer program, and Taylor Swift can do many things, but she can't save the Australian economy. Welcome to Fear and Greed Business News, Australia's best business podcast. It is Thursday, the 14th of March, 2024. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael. I haven't given up on Tay-Tay yet. I reckon she could still come through with a good... If she just popped down here again, a few more shows, that might just get that spending up, which would do us a world of good.
Oh, I'm looking forward to that story. I nearly lost it as I read that line in the intro just then, Sean, because you really do. You hold Taylor Swift in such high regard, don't you?
Absolutely. She's a superstar, that woman. I obviously a personal friend, know her so well. A superstar.
Yeah. And of course, you are alluding to the time that you met her in a hotel lobby and had no idea who you were talking to and had a lovely chat to her.
Yeah, it was a lovely chat and had absolutely no clue who she was.
Until you realise about 5 minutes later and go, oh, God, what did I say? Anyway, coming up after the show, Sean, you are speaking not with Taylor Swift, another American, though. You're speaking to Chris Wallace, who is the CEO and Chief Investment Officer of Vaughan Nelson.
Yeah, so I speak to Chris about investing in small caps, those companies that aren't, amongst the biggest companies. They're not the big tech companies in the US. They're not the big banks here. They're just smaller companies. And Chris suggests why it's not a bad idea to start looking at those companies at the moment. It is a great chat. A few things he says, like, he likes Europe at the moment, doesn't like biotech, and then he explains why. Now, Vaughan Nelson are a great supporter of ours, and just to have a chat with someone that is such an expert in global small caps is fantastic.
Yeah, it was a really kind of big picture look at the whole world. It is definitely worth a listen. I really enjoyed this one. It's coming up after the show. The main story this morning, though, Sean, the peak trade union body wants millions of workers to be given the right to work from home, while employer bodies argue that forcing people to work 8 hours straight should be dumped.
The Australian Council of Trade Unions said employers should only be able to refuse working from home requests on reasonable grounds, the same way they are legally required to treat requests for flexible arrangements from parents, carers and disabled workers. The peak body wants requests to work from home to have the same status as basic rights under the National Employment Standards, where disabled workers, parents, carers, over 55s, etc., can request a change in work patterns. Basically, they're in the box seat to get that. The boss can really only refuse after rigorous consultation, and that's what the ACTU wants to do when it comes to work from home. It's part of the ACTU's submission to a Fair Work Commission review of industry awards affecting the pay and conditions of up to 2.5 million workers to ensure conditions take into account the needs of those with caring responsibilities. Of course, those 2.5 million workers set the tone for the other millions of workers that come after them. So that's why this is such an important issue. Earlier this week, the Australian Industry Group and Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, two employer bodies, told the Fair Work Commission that awards that set wages and conditions should dump guardrails for set shifts and minimum pay for casuals and part-timers working from home. The groups argue that people clocking in from home might actually be better suited to work their 8 hours a day outside the normal timeframes, particularly if they have caring responsibilities.
And Sean, there's also a test case at the moment for the government's new same job, same pay laws, which could lift pay packets of miners by $20,000 a year.
The Mining and Energy Union applied for Fair Work Commission orders to require that WorkPacs, that's a company, WorkPacs 330 labour hire workers at a mine in central Queensland, be paid the same as the direct workforce. Now, the union's bid, which would cover 60% of the mine's workforce, says WorkPacs labour hire workers are paid about $10,000 to $20,000 less than direct employees, depending on the classification. It's the first time the new legislation, which was only passed in December last year, has been tested, and the Mining and Energy Union expects more in coming months. Michael, there is plenty going on in the world of industrial relations at the moment. It's taken a while under the new Labor government for some of these things to be instituted, but now they're being tested, and it's going to be a fun 12 months or so.
Oh, it certainly will be. All right, turning to local markets now. How did they perform yesterday?
The S&P ASX 200 closed up 0.2% to 7,729 points. Interest rate sensitive sectors, think consumer discretionary, real estate, financials, they did best, while material sectors underperformed. In fact, BHP, which is the biggest stock in the material sector, its share price hit a 9-month low yesterday before rebounding back a bit. That's on the back of lower iron ore prices. Singapore iron ore futures fell nearly 4% to under $106 a tonne. Fortescue Metals was also lower, though Rio Tinto ended 1% higher. Most of the banks did pretty well. National Australia Bank, ANZ and Westpac all rose by 1.5%. The retailers were mixed. Telstra was lower. Aristocrat Leisure, Xero and REA did well, while Qantas was down more than 2%. Building Materials Group James Hardie was up another 1%. Basically, its share price has doubled over the past 12 months, easily the best performer among the very large caps. In corporate news, Liontown Resources added 6% after it said it had done a deal with Commonwealth Bank and National Australia Bank to take a loan out for $550 million. It was the best on the day yesterday. Worst on the day was Core Lithium. Its share price was down 7% after it announced a big loss for the December half. Some of the gold stocks were weaker. Some of the gold stocks were weaker on the back of lower prices of the precious metal, and Appen shares were interesting. They were down 10% yesterday after it said it had been approached by a US tech rival, InnoData, about a potential takeover. Now, you would think a takeover bid would push the share price up. But on Monday and Tuesday, Appen's share price jumped more than 50%. It then went into a trading halt, and then it was forced to reveal the bid. Now, when it actually gave the details of the bid, the share price went backwards. Not that I know this happened or anything, but when a share price jumps 50% in 2 days and then it emerges that there's a bid, just a bit of smoke there. Just suggests that someone knew about it beforehand.
It does sound like that. Otherwise, it's an awfully big coincidence, isn't it, Sean?
An awfully big coincidence.
All right, what's happening in international markets?
Well, yesterday morning, the S&P 500 closed at yet another record high. Nvidia gained more than 7%, having lost 5% in one session earlier in the week. The company is now worth $2.3 trillion, not that far off Apple. Apple's about $2.67 trillion. The jump on Wall Street came despite US inflation increasing to 3.2% last month, slightly above expectations. Core inflation eased from 3.9% to 3.8%, though it also was above market expectations. Basically just highlights the challenge of getting that final bit of inflation under control. Oil's trading higher, with Brent fetching $82.50 US a barrel. Gold's down a bit, while the Aussie dollar is buying just over 66 US cents.
There is a fair bit happening. We've got a lot to get through. We'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, Beijing has recommended dropping tariffs on Australian wine exports worth $1 billion in a pretty big boost to the industry.
Sure is. The Chinese government's interim recommendation says duties on Aussie wines are no longer necessary. The final decision will be announced at the end of this month, but this is a pretty good guide to what's going to happen. Trade Minister Don Farrell said the interim decision was welcome. It also highlights what Foreign Minister Penny Wong described as a more stable relationship between the two countries. Beijing imposed $20 billion in sanctions on Australian products during the height of tensions, I suppose is how I'd put it, back in 2020. Sanctions worth about $2 billion remain on wine, rock lobsters and some abattoirs. China's ambassador to Australia on Monday said the review was moving on the right track, in the right direction. Treasury Wine Estates boss Tim Ford welcomed the announcement, and it also gave its share price a bit of a boost yesterday as well.
And elsewhere in politics, yesterday, Sean, the Immigration Minister, Andrew Giles, is under pressure after 149 detainees were issued invalid visas.
There was a technical issue with the visas, according to the government, and they've been reissued. Problem for the government, though, is that the opposition is making a fair bit of headway on the back of the bungling of immigration issues, really ever since the High Court decided last year that indefinite detention was illegal. That resulted in refugees with serious criminal histories being released into the community for a period, at least until new legislation was passed. We've now had this bungling of the types of visas that these people hold. So it's a problem for the government, really, politically. Even if not practically, it is politically.
Yeah. Now, Qantas, we mentioned this one at the top of the show. The airline is set to shake up its loyalty program, allowing travellers to book more flights using fewer frequent flyer points. On the surface, this sounds like good news.
It does. What I like about it, it sounds kind of easier to understand. So the new scheme is likely to be called Classic Plus and convert one frequent flyer point to 1 cent for economy flights, according to the Financial Review. The conversion is likely to be more generous for higher cabin classes, but at economy level, it means that a $100 flight would cost 10,000 frequent flyer points. Kind of easy to understand that. The airline's frequent flyer scheme is the biggest in the country. It's got 15.2 million members. It is still growing. The existing program offers 2 ways to redeem points at the moment. Travellers can secure classic reward seats, which use a set number of points, although these are often hard to find. Alternatively, they can use some points and pay the remainder, known as points plus pay. The value there is 0.7 of a cent per kilometre. The number of points needed for classic rewards is always much lower than those needed for points plus pay. This idea, which they're set to announce at some point next month, according to the Fin, just will make it a lot easier to use frequent flyer points, not only to find aircraft to fly in, but also to calculate what they're worth.
Sean, you know our sister podcast, How Do They Afford That?
I do.
Late last year, we did an episode, and this is probably one of our most popular episodes we've ever done. And we interviewed Steve Huey from iflyflat.com, and he's regarded as the points whisperer, in that he explains to people, and he does this for clients as well and businesses and the like, how to use your frequent flyer points more effectively, when you should be booking flights, what legs you should be using your points for, how to accumulate more points, and kind of the secrets to it, because I don't think anyone really understands how the frequent flyer systems work except for Steve. And that's why it's been one of our most popular episodes ever, because he takes us through it all and kind of tells us the best deals that he's ever gotten, how we can get them too. And anyway, I will never miss an opportunity to promote our podcast, and so I'm doing it now, squeezing in a mention. I'll put a link in today's show notes because it's probably worth a listen even now.
Well, if I had a holiday coming up next Saturday, going to Bali, yeah, I'm actually going to go back and listen to it. That's
just conveniently timed. Okay, moving on now, Sean. Consulting firm PwC has made 329 roles redundant as the fallout from last year's tax leak scandal continues.
There'll also be 37 partners whose retirement from the firm will be brought forward. PwC Australia Chief Executive Kevin Burrows said the reorganisation will make the firm simpler, more efficient and a centre-led business. Late last year, PwC reduced its workforce by around 340 after its consulting business was hit by the tax leak scandal, whereby a partner received privileged information from the government about tax plans and then shared it with clients. It also blamed economic conditions for those retrenchments.
A former employee of the ATO has been sentenced to 5 years imprisonment for engaging in corrupt conduct, including accepting bribes from a taxpayer under audit.
Yeah, so the bribes were exchanged for reducing millions of dollars in personal and business tax debts over a span of 6 years. The corrupt activities ceased only after the former ATO employee's arrest. The National Anti-Corruption Commission said the offender entered a guilty plea in July last year and was sentenced this week. According to the Financial Review, the charges included contraventions of the Commonwealth Criminal Code, such as accepting a bribe as a Commonwealth official, abuse of public office, and unauthorised access and disclosure of restricted data.
Finally, Sean, before we get to international news, we mentioned this at the top of the show. Taylor Swift can do many things. She might be able to fill our biggest stadiums many times over, but alas, she can't save the Australian economy.
Well, that's sort of, emphasis on sort of, the findings from the Commonwealth Bank Household Spending Insights for last month. I probably should apologise to Commonwealth Bank because it doesn't really say that, but she does get a mention in the report. The bank has information on purchasing from 7 million cards. So the series is a great real-time view of the world. The index was down 0.3% last month. And while it jumps around a bit, the trend since the past couple of months of 2023 is certainly lower. Last month, there were falls in a bunch of categories, but a massive 76% jump in spending at musical festivals. The Swift effect. About 600,000 Swifties attended the 7 concerts in Sydney and Melbourne last month. They spent plenty of money, but not enough to turn around a pullback in consumer spending.
In international news now, Sean, it is now official. President Joe Biden will face up to former President Donald Trump in the US election in November this year. It is on.
It is. Both have now won enough delegates from state polls to be called presumptive presidential nominees. Biden reached that point after he won Georgia's primary and enough of the state's delegates to put him above the 1,968 needed to lock up the nomination. Trump clinched it after winning enough delegates to exceed the 1,215 he needed to claim the Republican nomination. Now, it's the first time since 1912 that two presidents have faced off. Bit of a twist then. Back then, it was Democrat Woodrow Wilson who unseated. He won. He unseated one-term Republican President William Taft. But there was a third person on the ballot, former President Theodore Roosevelt, who ran under the Progressive Party banner. Now, Roosevelt, of course, was a Republican, was very upset about how conservative Taft was, therefore decided to throw his name into the ring, and so ran as a third party. Anyway, he lost. Woodrow Wilson, one of the, most aptly named presidents ever, I suppose. Woodrow Wilson, he became president. This year's election is expected to be one of the most expensive on record. In recent history, there has not been a campaign with candidates who have been in the public eye for so long and with such low approval ratings that will require them to spend billions of dollars to persuade voters to vote for them.
You know how old names kind of have a habit of coming back, like Atticus Finch, kind of from To Kill a Mockingbird, kind of came back all of a sudden about kind of 5 years ago. You know what's overdue, Sean? Woodrow. Yeah.
Woodrow.
Bring it back.
I'm trying to remember, growing up, there was a TV show and there's Woodrow the dog. I can't quite remember. Simon Townsend might have been the host, and he had Woodrow the dog. Anyway.
Unfortunately, Sean, that is before my time.
It is. Let's campaign for, we want more Woodrows.
We want the first Fear and Greed baby, someone who's kind of born into the Fear and Greed kind of listenership.
No details.
Yep, no, spare those details. But if you are a Fear and Greed listener who is due to give birth to a child anytime in the near future, please consider Woodrow.
Bring back Woodrow.
That's it. # bring back Woodrow. We'll get that trending.
Maybe not.
But finally, how about this? A Japanese company backed by Canon Inc., sending its first rocket to space yesterday, suffered, well, you would have to say it's a major setback, wouldn't you? When the vehicle exploded within seconds of takeoff.
You have to Google it, Michael.
Okay.
It is, tragic. I know, tragic, but there was no one on board. Keep that in mind. It's pretty funny. A self-destruct order was sent just seconds after launch, and boy, did that work. The lightweight Kairos rocket, developed by Space One Co., exploded into flames. The rocket was carrying a government satellite into space, and the rockets are actually smaller than normal, and it was set to fill a niche by offering competitive prices and frequent missions. No more, at least not this one. Its first attempted launch into space was a couple of days ago. That had to be delayed because the vessel was found offshore in what was supposed to be an evacuated area. Took off yesterday. I'd say 2-3 seconds. It just explodes. One of the more spectacular things you'll see.
Up next is the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. You're speaking with Chris Wallace, CEO and Chief Investment Officer of Vaughan Nelson, a fantastic supporter of this show and a great interview, Sean.
It sure is. All about global small caps and why you should think about investing in smaller companies.
Yeah, it's up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It is Thursday, the 14th of March, 2024. Make sure you're following the podcast and please join us online on LinkedIn, Instagram, X, TikTok and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson and that was Fear and Greed Business News. Have a great day.